Welcome back to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. My name is Dr. Melissa Clarke, your host. Please call me Dr. Mel. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're here every week. We're doing what we do here at Excuse Me, Doctor, making sure that you have the information you need to make wise health decisions, whether it be for yourself, your family, your loved one, or even your community. We're streaming on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're taking questions live. If you are new to the show, and I hope there are a lot of new people joining, please hit subscribe if you're joining on Facebook and subscribe if you're on YouTube and like if you are on Facebook. So please remember also to put those questions in the chat because that's why we're here. We're here to answer your questions every week. So let's go ahead and start creating an amazing week for ourselves with all the information that we are going to cover tonight. And to do that, I gotta have my co-host, Mr. Wayne Bruce, come on into the studio, bringing us the word on the street and what's on everybody's mind. Wayne, thank you for joining me.
Dr. Mel, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm great. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Dr. Mel?
I hear you loud and clear.
Is Mercury still in retrograde?
I don't know.
I have to know if Mercury is in retrograde because we're dealing with all these technical things
And
when we're doing the program,
right?
And sometimes technical stuff are subject to things. As my mother used to say, my mother, rest her soul, used to say, things that are mechanical, because it wasn't a lot of technical stuff. Things that are mechanical are subject to mechanical failure. She used to say that every time I wanted to take her car. And I would be like, it'll be all right. It'll be okay. I can handle it.
Right, because she was probably thinking Murphy's Law, what will go wrong what can go wrong will go wrong. So
and
that's
look,
probably what she was thinking about when it came to you and her car.
Yeah. And it probably did go wrong. But we're all straight, Dr. Mel. We're all straight.
Good. Well, we got a show lined up for tonight.
We got a show, man. It's a show that's, asthma runs in my family, partly because we big boned it. And you keep dispelling the big bone rule. But asthma runs in my family. So I found out it was an environmental issue with most of us.
Wow. Yes, that is very true. We're going to talk about that tonight because, we talk about the 5 self-health actions and all the things that we can do individually to empower ourselves with our health. But then there are things that are greater than us sometimes that we don't even know about when it comes to the environment that impacts our health and for the health of Black and Brown communities.
Yes.
That is crucial because we have been influenced and impacted by environmental racism. So we are going to tackle that weighty subject tonight. I hope everybody shares this episode with anybody who has asthma, with anybody who lives in a community with lead in the water, and it's not just Flint. Anybody who lives near any kind of manufacturing plant or oil refinery, share it with them because they need to hear this.
Right.
So I hope everybody's tuning in.
Because Black people really don't understand how impacted they are by the climate and the environment. And we got a guest from my alma mater, so I'm excited.
Yeah. All right. University of Maryland.
I'm a Terp for life, so I'm excited.
All right. And we have another guest who has been our longtime friend. So I'm excited to bring them both on when the time comes. But we're not ready for that yet. What are we ready for right now?
So we got to recap the news that was in the health world. Let's go to it.
All right.
And Dr. Mel, you can see we don't have a regular number 1 anymore. We have a new number 1.
Right. It's just called the COVID update. And, we getting away from the numbers because the numbers are shaky. I mean, that's the bottom line. So we're not even going to call this segment the numbers anymore. We'll talk about some numbers, but the COVID case numbers, they're unreliable. So we know that 60% of transmission occurs from people without any symptoms. And we're seeing that impact on the fact that cases are continuing to rise. And that's because of the BA4 and the BA5 subvariants in the United States, which are now 35% of the cases. So those variants are actually reinfecting people who had the original Omicron, the back in the day Omicron from December, January, and February, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to say, as we go to mass events and we're driven indoors because of the need for air conditioning, masking is still important because COVID is still out there. And testing, why are we not requiring that before we get together with family and friends indoors or even larger events? There's no reason why, because testing is widely available.
I need to ask you that question. Why are we testing people? Because I've been invited to several events, and the first thing I say, Dr. Mel, is what is your COVID protocol? Because
Right.
if you
And
don't
does it
have one,
include testing?
I probably will not be there.
That's right. That's right. I'll be joining by Zoom. Yep.
Zoom me in, FaceTime me, duo me, all
You're right.
the above, but I'm not going to be there.
That's right.
So
That's right.
so that's important. But as we go to our look at our number 2, if we're ready to go to our number 2, this one struck me really. We talked about long COVID on previous shows, and I even have, hey man, my family comes down with things, so I even have another family member with suffering long COVID. But really, the older Americans are taking a hit on long COVID.
Yeah, and just before we get to long COVID, I just want to remind people that hospitalizations are increasing, but the beautiful news is that deaths are remaining steady. Still 300 people a day, too many, but it's not rising. So that's good. It's a testament to the treatments, to vaccination and boosting and all that good stuff. So, and also we now know that 6-month-olds are now eligible to be vaccinated, 6-month-olds and up, with the Moderna, which is 2 doses, or the Pfizer, which is 3 doses. So wanted to make sure we got that out there before we went into the fact that.
Are we frozen? I think Mercury is in retrograde. That's what I
damage.
Really. Okay.
Yeah. And confused thinking.
Okay.
What they did was they looked at the MRIs of a large number of people between age 50 and 80.
Okay. I think Dr. Clarke is going in and out.
They had brain damage, especially in the area linked to smell.
Okay.
Yep, and it showed shrinkage in size equivalent to as much as a decade of normal aging.
So Dr. Mel, can you repeat that, because we had a bit of freezing in your camera. So if you could repeat that.
Sure. So basically, they looked at the MRIs of people who are age 50 to 80 with and without COVID about 4 months out. And it showed that there was brain damage, especially in the area linked to smell, with shrinkage in the size of the brain equivalent to as much as a decade of normal aging.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And they showed a 0.2% to 2% greater reduction in brain size compared to those people who hadn't been infected. And they had cognitive.
And I think we've been hit with the low bandwidth. So Mercury must be in retrograde. Dr. Mel obviously does not know that we are in a technical difficulty, but we're going to continue. And I think I'm going to get her to sign back in. In the meantime, you have me. That's very scary, folks. But what Dr. Mel was saying was long COVID is affecting Americans at a higher rate. It's for older Americans. For older Americans, it's reducing the size of their brain. But and on scans, it looks like that I can actually do the recap. I can. It actually looks like their brains are 10 years older than they are. So I'm going to continue with the recap. And that was for long COVID. So it's a question in the chat that says, does Dr. Mel recommend a second booster? And I can guarantee you she does. I'm going to get her back in here in 1 second, but I can guarantee you she recommends the second booster, and she's back on. There we
All
go.
right.
There we
Great.
go.
I don't know where y'all lost me. But
Well, you know, I
we
was
were
doing the
talking about
recap,
long
Dr.
COVID.
Mel. I was carrying on with the older brain taking a hit.
Okay.
So
all right. Well, the bottom line on that is
yes, let's get
just
the bottom
that,
lines.
yeah, the bottom line on that is that COVID causes brain damage. It causes the brain to shrink, especially in older adults. And it's a reason to not get COVID at all if you can avoid it. It's in keeping with what younger people experience, which includes, the impaired concentration, depression, even psychosis in a very few. And I also mentioned that if you suffer from long COVID, the best place to go to get help is just Google long COVID clinic near me. And there's actually a website that'll come up that you can put your zip code in and find a long COVID clinic close to you. They're usually at academic medical centers or large health systems.
All right. So thank you. And I already answered the question for you. Do you approve of a second booster? You don't have to say anything because we know you do.
Yes,
So
I
let's
do.
get to number 3, which is the biggie. But let us know, this was the biggest news in the country in the past 50 years.
Yeah.
As far as Supreme Court's one of the biggest decisions past 50 years, Roe versus Wade. Talk to us
Right.
about it, Dr. Mel.
Well, we know that 50-year-old ruling was struck down that guaranteed a person's constitutional right to terminate a pregnancy before viability around 24 weeks. Basically, it's paving the way for more than 20 states to pass new laws restricting abortions. There are a lot of religious groups, anti-abortion groups, and individuals who see this as a victory because it allows for fewer abortions. But there are a lot of serious health implications to this. First of all, history shows us that banning abortions does not really decrease abortions. It just makes them unsafe. And unsafe for a specific group in the population, poorer women, many of whom are Black and brown, who don't have the resources to travel, will likely end up in unsafe places getting abortions. Now, what does that do? That means they can actually either die from bleeding to death or from infection introduced into their body, which, if it doesn't kill them, can actually scar their uterus and lead to them being infertile for the rest of their lives. So that's a huge health consequence. We also know Black and brown people tend to get prosecuted more for the same behaviors. So there's that. And then there's also the concern that in some of the most restrictive states, digital rights experts are warning that people's online search histories regarding, accessing abortion services, their location data, messages, apps that track your period, and other digital information can be used by law enforcement agencies who are investigating or prosecuting abortion-related cases. So there are all these really serious implications that we need to understand. And the thing about it is, like I said, banning abortions doesn't make abortions go away. What actually makes abortions go away are free contraception, sexual education so that men and women understand how to avoid pregnancy, and then making it financially feasible for people to have families. So paid family leave, universal health care, affordable housing, closing the wage gap, having adequate, well-paying jobs, and giving people a quality education to be able to do them. Those are the things that actually make, abortions decrease in number.
Yep. Well, we'll see. This seems like the world has turned upside down, and I don't want to get into the politics of everything, because this is not about politics. This is about women's health and men's responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's setting a very dangerous precedent for some young men. I guarantee you, some young men mental health will not be the same because of it. So let's move on. Let's move into our stress thing, because I guarantee you some men are going to be stressed out because of this. Some men are going to be stressed out, not only because of this, but just, with the pandemic happening and everything, stress levels are high in America, and really high in our households.
Yes, you're right. And unfortunately, what social stress leads to is premature aging of your immune system. Like we need that right now, right? So this is how it works. Your immune system is made of cells that respond to whatever is foreign that gets into your body. It could be a virus, a toxin, a bacteria, or it could be a cancer cell that pops up in your own body. We have 100,000 cancer cells that pop up in our body every day. Our immune system's job is to take those out and neutralize them. So in order to do that, the immune cells actually create more of themselves, right? And they create antibodies. One sign of an aging immune system is that there are lower percentages of fresh disease-fighting cells and higher percentages of old, worn-out immune cells called zombie cells, right? These zombie cells no longer respond to threats like they should. They actually send out harmful chemicals. Now that reminds me of people I know who might refuse to change and grow because they don't have anything going on. So they just sit around and talk bad about everybody else. That's what these zombie cells do.
So the zombie cells sit around and talk bad about the rest of the cells in the system who are actually working.
Right, exactly.
These are the cells that are actually working.
Yes.
So, okay.
So this chronic stress creates more zombie cells, which makes your immune system less agile and is able to respond to threats. So therefore, you're more prone to infections, to cancer, and even conditions like heart disease and diabetes because of this bad energy that these zombie cells are putting out. So what to do? That's bottom line. Practice stress relief daily. We had a whole episode called Heart Math. So if y'all go back and look on YouTube, you'll find it. It talks about all the different exercises that you can do to relieve stress, including deep breathing, moving your body as if in slow motion, like Tai Chi. That also helps to trigger the calming reflexes. Meditation and prayer, exercise, and hobbies. All these things can help interrupt stressful, anxious thinking, or help to lose yourself and sort of get away from your problems, like Calgon, take me away, and help to decrease stress hormones, which will help to put your immune system back in better balance.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
Great to know we don't have the zombie cells. Somebody says zombie cells, gossipers. Are the gossipers.
They are. They're the gossipers.
Tracy Wall said, sounds like the zombie cells are the Twitter family.
Yes.
Twitter finger family.
Exactly. And for our newbies,
zombie cells.
And for our newbies, you'll soon find out what the Twitter family is. The Twitter finger family is.
Right.
Just
You'll
hang
find
on.
out
We're
shortly.
that.
So, I mean, all that stress and everything brings us to sleep. And due to stress, a lot of times we don't get enough sleep. And that triggers that COVID-20 sometimes.
Right. Meaning you're talking about obesity, right?
Right. Hey, man, the O word for me.
Yes, the O word. So,
For me.
well, and it for many people, and it turns out that even dim light can disrupt sleep, which raises the risk of health issues like diabetes, like obesity, like high blood pressure. So, for they did a study, healthy adults in their 20s sleeping for only one night with a dim light on, like the TV set on with the sound off, raised their blood sugar and their heart rate while they slept. And so we know that those changes eventually will lead to things like diabetes and high blood pressure. So, what we should all be doing is avoiding light when we sleep. Move your bed away from the window, use light blocking window shades. Don't charge. I am guilty of this. Don't charge your laptop and your cell phone in your bedroom where that blue light can disrupt your sleep, or at least stick them under your bed so you can't see it. Use a sleep mask if you can't get rid of all the light. And then, for people who, because of medical conditions or the medicines they're on, they have to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and don't want to be in the darkness and risk a fall. Use night lights, but put them low to the floor. Or they even have these. Recently, my sister-in-law and her mom visited, and she installed, unbeknownst to me, these little night lights that are motion activated, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, so you can do that too. But the whole idea is keep it dark as possible so that you get the best possible restorative sleep.
And one of our incredible people in the chat, Valerie Parker, said, sleep with a mask on.
There you go. Yep.
On your eyes. We have to say on your eyes, because sleeping with a mask on now could mean something else.
Right.
It could
And that's
mean
not
on your face.
situation.
Ain't really going to do you a lot of help with it over there. So that is it. You know what time it is?
What time is it, Wayne?
It's time for
the weekly debunk, stopping misinformation in its tracks.
Let me see. Torella Twitter Fingers, the third cousin of Tanisha Twitter Fingers, said, I've had COVID 3 times. What the heck do I need a vaccine for? I survived it. My body is all, and she had like 4 L's, all that behind it.
Okay.
When she texted me, and I had to say, don't know about that. Excuse me, Dr. Mel, is that true?
Well, congratulations to Tyrella for surviving COVID 3 times, getting through it. But the fact is, regardless of whether you've had COVID-19, what the facts point to is that getting a COVID-19 vaccine is the best protection against future episodes of COVID. There was a study published back in August of 2021 that showed if you had COVID before and you're not vaccinated, your risk of getting reinfected, because we just talked about those variants that are reinfecting people, is more than 2 times higher than for those who were infected and later got vaccinated. Okay? So there is some level of immunity for people who have previously had COVID, definitely. But it doesn't last that long. We talked about that earlier.
Okay.
The level of immunity, and so basically previous Omicron does not protect against the BA4 and BA5 Omicron variants that are out there now. And the level of immunity provided by vaccines after having COVID is higher than the level of immunity for those who had COVID but were not later vaccinated. So basically, Torella, it still will help to get vaccinated. It may have cut down on the 3 episodes that you had you got vaccinated earlier. If you currently have COVID, of course, you have to wait till your isolation period ends before making an appointment to get a vaccination.
Okay, Torella, you heard it. Don't text me anymore with anything that we have to debunk. My debunking days are over for Torella and her 3 times and all the L's.
There you go. Well, thank you for joining us, Wayne. We're going to see you back very shortly. And in the meantime, we are going to move on to our topic for tonight. Make sure you're starting to put your questions in the chat, because we're going to be talking about environmental justice. Now, I know you may have heard the phrase, your zip code has more to do with your health than your genetic code. And if you haven't, it basically means that where we live and what we are exposed to has more to do with if we stay healthy than our own genetic makeup, right? And the zip codes historically where Black and brown people have lived in the United States have been the sites of unimaginable environmental corruption, which have in turn corrupted our health. We're going to get into that tonight. We have some incredible guests lined up. First of all, we have Miss Sonya Ross. She is the managing editor of Inside Climate News. She's also the founder and editor-in-chief of media startup Black Women Unmuted, and is a recent inductee into the Society of Professional Journalists Hall of Fame. She was with the Associated Press for 33 years. She was their first Black woman White House correspondent, which put her on Air Force One with George W. Bush during September 11th. She's also my longtime friend, and so I'm delighted to welcome her to Excuse Me, Doctor.
Thank you. I'm about to say Dr. Mel. I had to remind myself to say Dr. Mel. Thank you so much for having me with you this evening. I'm so excited to talk about this subject with you.
Fantastic. And do we have Dr. Wilson available? Has he been able to join? All right, wonderful. Great to see you, Dr. Wilson. This is Dr. Sacoby Wilson. He is at the University of Maryland School of Public Health, where he's an associate professor, and he directs the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health. He's had 20 years of expertise as an environmental health scientist working in partnership with community-based organizations to study and address environmental justice and health disparities, and translate that research into action. So, Dr. Wilson, we are delighted to welcome you here tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Mill. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, let's jump into it. So, environmental causes have been widely associated with, quote unquote, saving the earth, and the trees and the whales and the endangered species, all very important work. Why should we as Black people in the United States understand how environmental justice pertains to us? Dr. Wilson, I'll throw that out there for you first.
Yeah, I like to say that environmentalists have done a poor job of talking about the environment. When I think about the environment, I still pop in my head, the first thing that pops in my head is a polar bear with a Coca-Cola. That's not your environment. The environment's about where you live, where you work, where you play, where you pray, where you learn, right? So I would, in the words of Clarke G. Woodson, environmentalists have miseducated us on environmental issues, right? So environmental justice movement is a movement that's a child of the civil rights movement. And what we find is, for some reason, our communities tend to be the places where you get dumped on when it comes to environmental hazards. Incinerators, chemical plants, power plants, right? Any kind of use where there's pollution, they find Black people. They find people of color, right? And that's not by accident, because of structural racism, because of environmental racism. You see this pattern of these hazards in our communities, and it leads to exposure to pollutants, and it leads to health impacts. I'll pass the mic back.
Okay, thank you. That was an excellent start off. So, Ms. Ross, what are some of the historical factors that led to what Dr. Wilson just talked about in terms of, environmental pollutants finding their way to Black and brown communities?
We don't have to look very far in our history to get to what was a huge factor in this exposure: the construction of the interstate highway system, where in the 1950s, the United States began connecting each state to each other by highways, and the advent of the American love affair with the automobile and traveling by car and all of this. So in the process of building these highways, they did what this country had been doing to Black people: disregard whatever we cared about as a race of people and just voiced the need of the overall society onto the backs of the Black community. So you saw cities, states, making decisions where they would put these highways, coupled with the expansion of the suburbs and the NIMBY movement. Not in my backyard. No, you're not going to build that road near our house. And so, by default, in a lot of cases, our communities were split in half, even quartered by highways for the sake of making sure that big trucks could travel into downtown to deliver goods and services, making sure that fuel could be transported in a more sophisticated and easy way and more efficient way, and that families could move easily through communities. But the families living in these communities couldn't move easily between the community because a lot of cases, prospering areas of town were just split in half, and people's access to life was cut off. And in exchange for that, we were relegated to breathing in diesel fumes and all kinds of particulate matter flowing through our communities. And I'm sure I see Dr. Wilson pointing when I say particulate matter. And so we'll probably get into that as we go. But that's the short answer. That's why Lil Cuz and them have asthma, as Wayne pointed out, and other respiratory ailments, not to mention the fact that a lot of our communities were robbed of trees, which also helped.
Yeah, no, those are all excellent points, and a couple of jumping off points from the things that you've all talked about already. But the first place I wanted to go is, what are the highways and the particulate matter, the diesel fuel and fumes that get released? That's a part of it. What are some of the other ways that we see environmental injustice happening in communities of color outside of that? We'll go back to Dr. Wilson for that.
Thank you. So you think about the highways and byways. So you have what we call traffic-related air pollution, as was just stated. So particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, that new car smell. You're supposed to hold your breath. Those are things you're not supposed to be exposed to. They can burn your eyes, nose, and throat. When you burn diesel, you get the same kind of volatile organic compound emissions, what you call asthma and other health effects. Also, just as a quick note, children of color disproportionately ride school buses. When they burn diesel, when your children are going to school, short-term exposure to diesel exhaust impacts the coordination, concentration, and focus. So how are we going to put America first? We're going to put our kids first. You got kids been exposed to these pollutants. How are they supposed to learn, everybody? Right? So you have that part. But getting to some of the other issues, zoning is a big issue. Inequities in zoning plan development are major drivers of environmental justice. Baltimore City, for example, was the first city in the country to have racism-based zoning. It got thrown up at Supreme Court, but the social patterning that you see in Baltimore, the social patterning you see in New York, right, where certain boroughs have hazards and other boroughs don't. Zoning is a big part of it. And then getting to the nature part, and I'll pass the mic back, there's a huge nature gap. So you mentioned not having trees, not having access to green infrastructure. So not having access to nature, right, is a huge environmental justice issue. Not having access to food is a huge environmental justice. Food apartheid, right? Not having access to recreational spaces, that's also an environmental justice issue. You said it earlier. Place matters, context matters. How you expect me to have a good diet when all I have is fast food restaurants? How you expect me to have a good diet when I have no transportation equity? It takes me 3 buses to get to the grocery store. How you expect me to get out of harm's way of a hurricane, right? That's another thing about climate change. Hey, y'all, you may not believe in climate change, but climate change believes in you. So how you expect me to get out of harm's way when there's no preparedness, there's no equity preparedness because of my skin color, right? So that's another environmental justice issue, climate injustice. Pass the mic back.
Yeah. So with the climate injustice, I know we were talking before, Ms. Ross, about some of the after effects of hurricanes, right? And how that has disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities. Can you expand on that?
Oh, absolutely. And you can find this information on InsideClimateNews.org. We reported on this. There was a study done by the journal Science of the Total Environment of the after effects in communities after Hurricane Florence in 2018 and Hurricane Matthew in 2016. And one thing this study found is a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities in North Carolina in terms of gastrointestinal illness post-hurricane, a dramatic increase in nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, this sort of thing, manifesting in Black and Brown communities and people who live in Black and Brown communities after those hurricanes. So climate change simply intensifies what is already going on with us in our communities. You also have situations like St. John the Baptist Parish in Louisiana, where the EPA just opened an investigation into environmental conditions there. And this is a majority Black community with cancer rates that are something like 1,500 times higher than the national average. And that particular community is home to the nation's only neoprene plant. It's been there for 53 years. And the people who live there have been saying for generations, something's wrong with so many of us coming down with cancer here.
Yep.
And their requests have their pleas had fallen on deaf ears until recently when the Biden administration's EPA opened an investigation into that community around that neoprene plant. And this neoprene plant is it's alarmingly close to a school, parks, you name it, churches, things like that, where the manifestations of our community life. So let's just say you may have grown up in St. John the Baptist Parish and moved away to someplace ostensibly that's environmentally more sound, but you go back home and visit your family, you may still go to church there, different things like that. We also can talk about, if we can talk about what ends up in our fish. A whole lot of us like to go fishing. We like to pull our fish out of the lake, out of the river nearby. And that may not be the safest thing in terms of what's ended up in the fish. I mean, Marvin Gaye was talking about this with What's Going On a generation ago about fish full of mercury. Well, now we know there in some places in Florida, the fish are full of Valium and other prescription drugs or opioids or things that end up somehow in the water supply.
Yep. Wow. That's mind-blowing. That was really mind-blowing. So, Dr. Wilson, what are some examples of health conditions that have been successfully addressed by addressing environmental factors? Are there examples that we can look to? Because this information is very disempowering. So I want to be able to see, are there some examples that we can look to and rally around?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in public health, so I think one of the interventions is really, again, changing context. Context matters. So when you provide access to sidewalks, when you provide access to parks and green space, there's been studies that have shown an increase in improvements in mental health, right? Improvements in respiratory health outcomes, because when you have trees are good for several things: air pollution mitigation, heat mitigation, noise pollution mitigation, right? So having tree canopy can shade your house, right, and reduce your energy bill, but also having trees act as our lungs. So trees take in the toxicants, right, and they give fresh air. So having trees, you have that positive benefit. Also, when you think about creating greater access to food infrastructure, right, there's studies have shown that you can have improvements in health outcomes, reductions in metabolic syndrome, improvements in, reduction in sort of other health effects associated with it, metabolic syndrome, right? And then when you look at issues when we modify,
I just want to stop you for a second. To metabolic syndrome is the trio of diabetes, hypertension, and obesity. Yeah, just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, and for folks, I have two of the three. I have diabetes and hypertension. So so you think about when we modify the built environment, right? You can really see improvements in health outcomes. So and you think about environmental justice from a policy perspective too. The Clean Air Act has been really beneficial to reducing pollution levels over time, whether it be particulate matter, whether it be nitrogen dioxide, NO2. You remember that, everybody, knock on the door, knocks, sulfur dioxide, SOx, pull your socks up. These are combustion byproducts. When we burn, gasoline, diesel, you get these pollutants. But you have hot spots in communities of color. So even though you've seen trends since the 70s of pollution levels improving, you still see these hot spots in our communities because of the cumulative impacts of mobile pollution and also stationary sources. So more needs to be done to transition a lot of the school buses, the big trucks to electrification. So electrifying them will reduce pollution emissions, and that we know that works, right?
Right.
So we need to be all advocating for all of our buses and trucks, all of our fleet vehicles to be electrified.
Yeah. And I really wanted to applaud one of the things you said earlier about bringing food and healthy produce access in our communities. And people might not think of that as environmental justice, and you could debate whether it is or not. But the point is, if you have a lot of toxins in your body, eating healthy foods and healthy produce will help. They're antioxidants. So they help to lessen the effects of these environmental toxins on our body. So that access is almost like a double whammy. You put more pollution in, and then you take away or limit the access to the very thing, nutritious food that can help your body cope with it. So,
and can we talk about, just for a second here, when you think these are what I would call the unintended consequences, or maybe they are intended, I don't know, the consequences of a laissez-faire attitude about environmental justice and environmental matters. You talk about grocery stores in our communities, and when they get to political motivations and trying to be efficient about how to address that problem. So the answer is to build a Wawa or a racetrack or a Royal Farms gas station, convenience stores as a solution to the food desert. And the result of that is a high concentration of fossil fuel emissions in our communities. Again, near the churches where our grandparents go to pray, near the schools where our children go to learn, and how in the world can they concentrate if they're both hungry and breathing in fossil fuels? And the closest thing that they can buy are Now-A-Layers and pork rinds and things like that at the convenience store. But in a lot of political jurisdictions, that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying, well, this can help to alleviate the food desert problem.
And it really is a nutrition desert. Yeah, sorry.
It's in development at the same time.
Yes,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Dr. Mo, sorry, go ahead.
Well, we are like deep in this discussion, but we got to get the audience in here. So Wayne, please come on back. Come on back in. Let us know if there are any questions that are in the chat, any comments, folks wanting to join in the discussion.
I guess I got to cut myself on to go back into the chat.
You're on.
Wow, this is an amazing discussion, and I want to thank you all. We have a few comments and a couple of questions. Yvonne Smith asks, how do we find out about our air, water, where we live? Air, water, in those where we live in our neighborhoods.
Okay. Who'd like to take that?
Yeah, there's a couple. I'll jump in real quick. So you can go to your local health department potentially to get some information on what's happened, and local air quality, local water quality, your local Department of Environmental Protection, your state Department of Environmental Protection. So, for example, in the state of Maryland, it would be the Maryland Department of Environment. Now, there's some online tools that you can look to. US EPA has something called US EPA Environmental Justice Screen. That's a tool you can type in your zip code and look. It can map hazards near your house. EPA also has the Tox Release Inventory, the TR mapper. It can map facilities that are emitting to the air, water, and soil. And there's also a tool called Enviro Atlas. So there's a lot of these online tools that visualize uses and hazards. You can put in your zip code, and you can see what's happening with your air quality and your water quality.
I'm going to do that tonight. Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Any other questions?
So we have from Valerie Parker, is eating organic better if at all possible? Will that help?
Anybody want
We
to take
talked
that?
about eating, not eating
Well,
now laters. This goes
let me
to
just
not
let
eating
me
now
just
laters.
say,
But
Don't
can
eat
we
now
eat
later.
of course, eating organic can be helpful, but consider this. In some places, they want to allow farmers to use produced water on their crops that they're
Sonya,
growing.
could you say what that really is? You using a nice euphemism. Tell them what that is.
I'm
Produced
gonna
water.
get to what produced water is. Produced water is what used to be that oily crap that somehow got involved in some kind of an industrial process. So they ostensibly take it somewhere, clean it, and then make it available to farmers to put on crops that you eat. And how are we supposed to know what is happening with crops that were grown with produced water and what that contamination could lead to? Now, if you want to know more about that, again, Inside Climate News is reporting on this produced water problem.
And let me jump in
And
let me jump in real
go
quick.
ahead.
I think it's important for us to have urban agriculture. If you in an urban area, grow your own food. Food is health, food is wealth, food is power, food is culture. I have a micro farm in my house. I was picking blackberries, blueberries, raspberries. I got apples growing. I'm trying to get some pomegranates growing. My bananas don't grow, but I got grapes growing. Grow your own food, folks.
But
Grow
do
your own
it with
food.
an understanding that you might be living in a community that's adjacent to a Superfund site. For example,
Well,
there's
you
a
can always
community.
ho.
you can always get your own soil though.
Raised bed of
Raised bed. That's
raised
exactly what I've done.
There
Yeah.
you
You
go.
can.
Yeah.
I don't want to discourage that. I'm saying
Yeah.
gain a complete understanding of your environment because there are a lot of our communities that are rife with Superfund sites that have
Yep.
not been cleaned up yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And so I think the message is eat organic when possible, but wash it as well as you can before you
Yeah,
eat it.
clean that
Okay.
stuff before you eat it.
Because you could be eating factory oily discharge.
You could. You could.
So we have another question
Yes,
from
Wayne.
Kay Williams. What foods or supplements would be most beneficial in countering environmental toxins?
Well, I'll take that. I don't necessarily recommend supplements. That's something that you'd have to talk over with your doctor. But the entire spectrum of fruits and vegetables, all the different colors, if you eat the rainbow, those colors actually are different antioxidants that have different effects and can help to detox your body by having a diet rich in fruits and vegetables. So that's why we had a whole episode on plant-based eating. It doesn't mean you have to cut out meat. It just means that you need to make plants and produce the focus of the meal as opposed to the meat or the grain. And by doing that and eating that at every meal like that, you'll get enough of the antioxidants in your body to help to counter the effects of some of these terrible things that Dr. Wilson and Miss Ross have been talking about.
We have another question from Pamela Kennedy Chapman, and she lives in the state of Maryland. How do we get the Maryland State Department of Education to include environmental justice in the curriculum at all grade levels?
Wow.
Great question. So Maryland was the first state in the country that had environmental literacy as a state mandate. And I got to the University of Maryland 12 years ago. I tried to get them to put environmental justice in, but it didn't really, nothing happened. But recently in Prince George's County right now, they're actually adding environmental justice, air quality, and climate change into the curriculum. So we're actually helping right now, curriculum writers doing that. And in Montgomery County, I believe Montgomery County or Howard County, I'm getting them mixed up. They've also have started training their teachers on climate change. And in Baltimore City has done a lot through their green schools to bring in some of the sustainability in and some environmental justice in Baltimore City. So you see it happening in pockets, but I think there's a lot of opportunity because we know climate change is real. And I think we're making progress. So I would say try to engage with your school system. Say, hey, look what they're doing in Prince George's County. Look what they're doing in Montgomery County. At least starting at that level, we can see change across the state.
can we assume, since people all over the country are listening, what are some of would that be true, for other states too, or is there progress being made in other states with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I know there's other states that have environmental literacy mandates. I think one thing we need to do is actually get with the Department of Education. I was talking to a colleague actually this weekend about the Department of Education needs to put more into making sure climate change is in curriculum for K to 12. Make sure environmental justice is in curriculum K to 12. We got to make sure when we talk about STEM or STEAM or whatever acronyms you want to use, that we actually talk about justice, social justice, environmental justice, health justice. Start early. My kids school me all the time, y'all. My little girl's like, Daddy, you taught yourself to Dr. Earth. Where your electric car at? Don't have enough money yet. You talk about you Dr. Earth, Daddy. What your solar panels at? I mean, they be tripping, but I'm trying.
They're holding your feet to the fire.
Household, right? They're 7 years old. My little 7-year-old. So you got her doing that. We can have more advocates early on who could really change the world, right, and change how we address these issues in America.
Yeah, because our generation is failing, so it will need to be their generation.
One thing that we're trying to do at Inside Climate News is create a new generation of environmental journalists of color so we're working directly with historically Black colleges and universities on getting our journalism students excited about this as a news story, and especially those young journalists who really have answered that clarion call on covering racial matters in America. Because what has to happen in terms of the messaging on race is to take it out of this conceptual zone and begin to apply it deliberately to subject by subject by subject by subject, and environmental matters, and particularly climate change is one of the areas that's fastest growing. We have been covering race ad infinitum when it comes to criminal justice, when it comes to education, even in economic matters, but not as much in terms of environment and where we live and how we get treated. And so taking that on as a racial justice coverage area is something we want to excite our young people about. They already have the enthusiasm that they need to begin to take this subject on. So when those of us who have been a little bit more seasoned in the field began to apply our expertise and our skill set to helping those young journalists grow and get their own experience and knowledge in this area, then that becomes a generational approach to getting the news covered the way that it should be covered.
Exactly.
Wonderful. And that's precisely why I wanted to do this episode, because we have discussions around justice in all of these other areas, but when it comes to environmental health justice, there's not enough discussion. So
it's the same system of oppression, y'all. It's all connected. It's the same system.
It is.
It's more
true.
when we look at it all together holistically.
Well,
right. It's like the Hydra with all the different arms. It's just manifested in all different kind of ways.
To that point, panel, just want to say we have a comment from Valerie Parker. She says, my mom grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and she and most of the women in her family had breast cancer. Her brother and father died of cancer as well. Is Birmingham one of the heavy industrial areas? Actually, it's a question. I'm sorry. She wants to know, is Birmingham was it a heavy industrial area, or have you seen it?
Yeah. So sorry to hear about your family. And you could have a cancer cluster potentially there, but the way to figure that out is you can use those tools I mentioned before to look at the hazards that are in Birmingham, depending on what part of Birmingham. They're in North Birmingham. I believe Reverend Michael is doing some work with GASP on environmental justice issues in Birmingham. I believe there's a Superfund site in one part of Birmingham. The University of Alabama at Birmingham has a Superfund research center where they've been engaging with communities in Birmingham. I'm on the advisory board. So I would say get with the University of Alabama at Birmingham Superfund Center. Talk to Reverend Michael with GASP to find out if your community, where your folks were from, if there were hazards there. And then and see what it can do to really tell that story, because there are studies, there's a research center, there's a resource, and you should be able to check them out.
All right.
Yeah. Great.
Dr. Mel, looks like TikTok is on the wall.
Oh wow. Okay. That is my co-host playing his producer role and telling me that I need to wrap up. TikTok, I take it, is the clock and not the app. So
not the app. Dr. Mel, you're getting sharp. If I'm going to say anything, Dr. Mel, you're getting sharp. We just want to remind all the latecomers to the panel here, if there were any, to stick around. It's not over. Dr. Mel, you got it.
Well, I just want to thank Dr. Wilson, Dr. Sacoby Wilson, Miss Sonya Ross. You guys were incredible in the knowledge that we packed into a really short period of time, and we're able to get in those great audience questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Wayne, for helping us field those questions. And one more time, Sonya, about where people can find Inside Climate News.
Yes, you can find us online at InsideClimateNews.org. You can follow us on Twitter at Inside Climate. And please remember, you don't have to pay for this news. Go to our website, click the main page, and you can see at the bottom of the page where you can send for email newsletters. We will email you newsletters telling you the latest things going on in the environment. And you can also go in and click Justice and see our entire environmental justice archive of the various stories that we have reported. And this news is absolutely free to you. There is no paywall. So please look, come check us out, subscribe. And if you feel like throwing something our way, you can click that donate button and give a little something to help us keep this news free and available. We're not asking you to go hug a tree. We're just asking you to care about that particulate matter in the air around your house and where you grow up and where you're raising your children.
Well, I say get the free stuff. Dr. Wilson, are any Twitter or anything you want to tell us about?
Yeah, y'all can. I don't use it as much as I should, but Twitter, Dr. EJ for the people. Just to let y'all know, if I didn't say it earlier, we do empowerment science and liberation science. So we do science for the people, other people, and by the people. So you can go to Dr. EJ for the people. Follow me on Twitter. My center is www.CEEJH.center. And if you want to learn more about environmental justice, we have our upcoming symposium, August 11th to 13th. The theme is energy versus power. Okay.
Wow. That's that. And on that note, that is a powerful note to end on. I want to, before we leave, I just want to remind my Be Health Empowered family listening that there's that research opportunity to work with Howard University to help figure out COVID resilience. It's just filling out 2 surveys and you get compensated up to $100. So if you are interested, please contact my assistant, Dana Harvey, at danaharveyresearch@gmail.com. That's DANA Harvey, HARVEY, research@gmail.com. So thanks again for joining. I hope that, you have really learned a lot about environmental justice on this episode. We will catch you very soon. And remember, until I see you again, be wise, be well, and be health empowered. Thanks for joining.
This must be Big Mama. She's over 65 and she's on dialysis. But she's boosted, so the worst that I could do to her is a rough 1 or 2 nights at home. But James here, he's not boosted. And he never gets off the couch. And he's got diabetes. Do you know that 40% of the people who die of COVID have diabetes? But his wife here, she hasn't had her second dose yet. So I'll be still with her because women are 4 times more likely to get long-term COVID than men. Yeah, I'm glad to be sticking around here. I am so glad they let me in. So I guess I should thank the Robinsons. They invited me. They still don't know. I hooked up with Dave 3 days ago. He'll start coughing tomorrow. And I bet in 10 days he'll be on a ventilator. Now his wife, she's not vaccinated because she thinks it'll prevent her from being pregnant. But what they don't know is that I can decrease sperm count. Sorry, Dave.